Welcome everyone to another episode of Bay of Bengal Dialogue Series. For this episode, I have a very special guest today, Professor Yasmin Saikia from Arizona State University. Professor Saikia, welcome to Bay of Bengal Dialogue Series.
Thank you, Shamir. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk to you.
Could you please tell us for our audience a little bit more about yourself, on your scholarships, and the kind of work that you have done in the past?
I am originally from Assam. I grew up partly in Assam, and I spent most of my academic studies at Aligarh Muslim University from class 11 to my initial master's in history. I chose history in Aligarh because it was a center of advanced studies and had a very wonderful reputation. We had really wonderful professors like K.A. Nizami, Irfan Habib, Athar Ali, Iqtidar Alam Khan, all of these people who were highly specialized in medieval Indian history. Which has been periodized as medieval by the British, which really is actually the history of the Muslim contributions to India. So I went to the US and pursued a master's in American history and Southeast Asian history. But I found in writing my original thesis in American history, I worked on race relations, on Black experience in America. And I found that America, despite its extensive discussions or extensive, quantification and rhetoric and discourse on rights of people and empowerment and democracy, really was not giving the same kind of opportunities to people they thought were still in some way their slaves, the Black people. It really pushed me back, and I couldn't believe that a country that was as I said, a champion of rights, actually could not come to terms with its own history. So then I decided not to continue with American history, although I won an award for my MA thesis as the best thesis award. I wrote on race relations. I came back to do South Asian history because I realized that perhaps my knowledge of what I had been trained to study and being from South Asia, I could probably speak from inside that story, that community, to rethink history in a different way. And I pursued that. I finished a MA and PhD in history from University of Wisconsin in Madison. Got my first job in a small college when I was still finishing my PhD in a college called Carleton College in Minnesota, where I worked for 2 years. Then I went to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where I did most of my initial writing. My 3 books I wrote when I was there for 11 years. And when I completed this 3rd book, which is on Bangladesh and the making of Bangladesh, I was invited to be the holder of a peace chair. And I moved to Arizona State University. And I have been in Arizona State University now for the last 15 years, where I'm now developing my scholarship on peace and history.
So I can't hold myself back in asking you questions. Still these days, you're in the South Asian culture, or even if you go to the North America, the brown parents, the medical school and the engineering school is the most prestigious things they would tell their sons and daughters to pursue. So in the 1990s, 80s, so you pursued history. So I'm curious, that was that the history of Assam, your personal experience, or it's more about your intellectual quest for history that kind of took you in that history direction?
Okay. As I said, I come from a family of academics. My grandfather taught mathematics, my father biochemistry, and my mother philosophy. Okay. And so history was not part of it, or literature or something like that. But I could have studied anything. I had topped in my school living exam. I chose to study humanities without maybe too much thinking at that time. I was not really conscious, but my mother said, please don't study philosophy. Anything else study. And my father said, don't go for science. It's very boring. Okay. Don't be a lab rat. Do something that has more, color in your life. And so I sort of ended up actually being a historian is because I went to Aligarh. And as I said, in Aligarh, we had some world-renowned professors who really made the subject of history something very alive, real, and had, as you said, a theoretical and conceptual validity. And because of that, I think if I had not come across those professors, maybe I would have studied economics, maybe I would have studied another subject. It was those teachers who gave me that impetus to study history. But as I told you in the past, it was by going to America and realizing that history is actually weaponized, that history is not a neutral subject. It's not just something you study for the sake of it. You study because you're actually planning a future. History is not about the past. We tell about the past in order to prepare ourselves, not in a chronological way, but in a conceptual way. Where do we want to be? Right? As I told you, the black-white relationship is still very, very tense and difficult and complex relationship because a sense of equality in the West hasn't really emerged. It talks about it, but it doesn't see the world as an equal place. And so when you study history from that point of view, you actually realize a task that you have ahead of you in order to create something that we consider world that is truly, that can be equal, can have fraternity, and can have liberty. All these are ideals. But how do you practice these ideals? History actually gives you, in my way of thinking, I bring philosophy into my history. I bring understanding of religion into my history. I bring understanding of literature into history. I see these creative forces of the human mind giving you a possibility or giving you the language of how to think of what a human society should be, not what it has been. The has been is a kind of indicator telling you what you should be. So history is about the future. We have done this. Why did we do this? What did we learn from it? What do we make out of it? Is actually a quest to become something. So it's my history is very philosophical. As I said, my mother was a professor of philosophy. We used to have all these discussions at home.
You got some of the genes from
Yes. So the genes come from there, the discussion. So history is a very lively subject. And as I said, it can also be weaponized. It can be a tool to either divide communities or to rethink what communities can be living side by side in a more humanistic, egalitarian way of being that can improve human society, and history then evolves differently.
Yeah, I think most of your work is very reflective of how you look at history to promote peace.
Yes.
I'm not sure if some of the people who knows your work call you a humanist historian of that. Is that the right?
Mostly people think I'm a human. They use the word humanist historian. I am not humanist in the secular sense of the term. I'm a humanist in the religious sense of the term. Okay. I believe in the dignity of the human that I've learned from Islam.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think it's a good segue to also talk about in Bangladesh, particularly. Bangladesh has been wrestling between the secular nationalist and then the Islamic influence, Islam as a kind of a political and cultural force. And so, in the public life, when it comes about the values and how Bangladesh, Bangladesh right now at a crossroad, right? There are kind of political Islams there due to very repressive nature of the regime. They were kind of sidelined. Now they are kind of forced to kind of come into front, and but also there is also fear on the other side, given the narrative that we have here for a long time. So yeah, what are your thoughts on kind of how Bangladesh as a society could navigate that tensions between the secular nationalist versus Islam as a kind of a cultural and political force?
That is, I think, a very complex and complicated issue. And I am still trying to understand after years of decades actually of coming to Bangladesh. I started coming to Bangladesh from 2001, and it's now over 2 decades of a relationship in Bangladesh. I am still trying to grapple with this concept of what is a Bangladeshi Muslim. And I do not have Bangladeshi Bangali Muslim. What is that concept? I do not have an answer for this. It's a question in my mind. I'm still exploring it. So your question about these two tensions that exist in Bangladeshi society, secularism and religiosity, both of them are political concepts, as you're saying. You're saying culture and politics. Culture is something else, but when culture becomes politics or politics becomes cultural, it produces something different. Secularism is as political as religion is political here. And in many countries, it's not, Bangladesh is not unique to this, particularly given that Bangladesh is a multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic, multi-religious nation state. You have, so that's where religion becomes more of a tool, as you said, politics. It can be easily transmitted. I think Bangladesh has, in given its geography of having received many different kinds of people here, given a geography of being a riverine society, it has been a place of confluence. and convergences. And when we overlook those confluence and convergences and want to create a homogenized, monolithic, singular kind of religion or a community, we're going to run into trouble. It's bound to be, because how do you accommodate so many different people? So, to be, what do you mean by secular? I do not quite understand myself, because does secularism mean a kind of vacuous identity that does not have any foundation? Or you're telling people to forget everything in their past? You asked me, you started the question by asking me, how did I become a student of history? I told you my past. Without my past, I cannot be who I am. So if you tell society that all your past you have to forget, and now you have to behave in this way, which is a singular, monolithic, homogenized way, people don't know what to look for. They can go and buy as much from a mall, this, that, other, fill up their lives with things, but it does not fulfill them. So where do they go for looking for fulfillment? They end up then, religion sometimes can become that. Tradition is the first thing they go to. And if the tradition is weaponized as politics, then it creates division. And I'm not for that either. Religion is a pathway for you to become a better human being, which my religion teaches me, that you should become a better custodian of the world, because you have been given conscience, you have been given will, you have to choose the right thing that benefits humanity. And that kind of religion, a combination of religion that looks out for the betterment of everyone in this multi-ethnic Bangladesh, multi-linguistic, multi-religious Bangladesh, I think, is the kind of religion which truly is an Islamic approach to being with others through convergences, meeting, mixing, creating horizontal relationship, not vertical relationship. And we have lot of examples from Islam, early Islam, the prophetic Islam, in which relationships were horizontal. So one did not try to overrule or subdue the other. Rather, it was always through discussion, discourse, and deliberations that certain principles were agreed upon and became relevant for all the different communities in the early period, whether they were Jewish or Christians and even pagans. The Muslims are already there. Now, it was historical developments that followed that in some way undermined those relationships. And today we are in a place where religion has become a divisive factor rather than a way of bringing communities together to respect one another and live in a society that creates certain kinds of rights and obligations that we all fulfill. So if secularism can do that kind of work, where it dignifies the human, teaches us to be better citizens, and look out for the well-being in an equitable way, it will work. Secularism, if it makes me vacuous and does not give me the capacity to think and only tells me you have to follow this, because we are directing you to do, that is not the growth of a human person. Likewise, if religion tells me, do not ask questions, do not raise your voice about this or that, do not protest, that is not the religion that Islam teaches you. Islam has always taught you to resist, to fight for justice, right?
Even
but
within
with
the
guidance.
intellectual traditions.
Even with, that's what I'm saying, with a complete intellectual tradition. Justice is a cornerstone of Islam, right? Haq is a cornerstone. You have your rights. It has taught you from the very beginning. But you have to ask for your rights in a civil way. There has to be civility. There has to be akhlaq in your. You can't go and beat up a person to demand your right. So we also have to learn how to use our religion in a way that improves us, not make religion into a tool that I will suppress the other group of people. So that's my approach to how perhaps Bangladesh can be a Muslim country without being theocratic and forcing your religion on others. You don't have to be a theocracy. You can be guided by religion, and yet you can be very, very civic. You can translate religious ideas into civic ideas that appear and can work for the betterment of everyone. So it has to be made understandable and not a discourse of fear and control. I think, but when religion is used to control people and to deny people their rights, that is when I think religion becomes politics. Bangladesh also has a very rich tradition of folk religion, folk Islam, that came from Sufis, and it was very inclusive. And it's important to revisit that history of why were the Sufis who came from Baghdad and from Khorasan and from Iran and from places that people did not speak Bangla. How did they make themselves understandable here to the people living in these complete kind of, isolated villages in the 13th, 14th, 15th century and actually spread Islam here? It was their conduct. It was their akhlaq. It was the way they treated people. It was the skills that they taught people. It was the engagement, really, the engagement with people that made Islam so attractive because it dignified, it gave human beings a dignity of them as human beings. And they flocked to this religion. But today, why are people afraid of Islam in Bangladesh? I'm asking that question. Why is there such a fear of religion in this place when it's a Muslim majority country?
So we have seen the failure of political Islam.
But political Islam is something else. I'm not talking of political Islam.
Yes, but what I'm trying to, the direction I wanted to go is, we have seen the political Islam in Middle East as well as in the South Asian region hasn't succeeded. But in the present context of Bangladesh, if you speak to kind of people in the society, there is a clear, in the short run, perhaps, given what they experienced in the past, there is a rise of political Islam. I personally see clearly here in Bangladesh, and you have been interacting with a lot of people in the past couple of days, and of course you're reading, listening to other people. How do you see that future span out in the backdrop of this July uprising?
Since I'm not a scholar of current contemporary issues of Bangladesh, I have a little hesitation towards answering this question. And my knowledge just comes from newspaper articles and other people's writing. I haven't directly started working with people who have experienced this particular moment. But when you said that political Islam had a kind of rise here and had an impact on society, I don't know what they did actually. What was their contribution? I don't know. Have political Islam. I mean, first of all, when Islam has politics in it, Islam is a total religion. It's a deen, right? It's a way of life. Islam does not separate state and society, but Islam lays down the principles of how a state and person, right? State are interconnected. The church and the person is not, or the mosque and the society are not separate. So Islam, but it gives you the principles of how a state should behave with its people. Right now, if political Islam has not adopted the ethics of how to govern, it cannot claim that it is actually representing Islam. It is representing a politics in which it is using Islam, right? And that kind of is a dangerous kind of thing to do when you are playing with emotions of people. There are a lot of people who believe in Islam, right? And a lot of people take it on face value. You come and tell me with your dari and topi and your pajama and things that you are a firm believer of this religion. You're a firm believer of what the principles of the religion are, and you firmly believe that there is accountability of what you're doing. I may take you at face value that this person, but then your intentions, your niyat is something different. And political Islam played with that. The niyat was perhaps just to get power, not to really serve people, right? So there is a reason why people feel that they cannot trust people who look religious because they have been taken for a ride too many times. But that is what I think you have now a movement, as you said, about the July revolt. Here people are using different terms: revolution, revolt, uprising. I do not know exactly what term one should use for the July incident, but it did bring a change. It did end a system that people felt was oppressive, was extractive, was not dignifying them, and they changed it. Now what they will do with it, what kind of Muslim country Bangladesh wants to be, it really has that challenge in front of it, and it has to answer to that challenge.
Yeah. So in your interactions and the conversation with various people here, and what have you read into those conversations? What do you see is missing here in 1971? That's after post-independence. We know that which direction the country go. So many here during July, after July, were very optimistic to rewrite a lot of things, take Bangladesh in new directions. But 1 year down the line, people would choose cautiously optimistic that they probably see it falling back in some way, in the old-fashioned way of going. In the same way it used to be run. So, what do you see is missing in this conversation? What should be our civil society and intelligentsia, academia, and what role also actually they can play here to really direct Bangladesh in a direction so that it's not becoming a missed opportunity the way it was in 1971?
My initial impression, which is just a gut feeling, it's not based on, as I said, real information of any kind or any kind of deep thinking, is that perhaps what is really lacking is a vision. There is no, some people may use the word ideology. I will use the word vision. The vision has to be clear to people. The populace has to know that we are working towards this. Now, in 71, as you said, they gave an image of something that was very evocative, which is Sonar Bangla. It was something people could relate. It was a very romantic idea of this golden Bangladesh. What is golden Bangladesh? It never was explained, but it was an image. It was powerful. People could think we will create this Eden on earth, Jannah on earth, right? This is what golden Bangladesh will be. They could grab onto something. But of course, as you said, it's dissipated. It was a beautiful romantic image, but the image did not translate into reality. Now, you need an image. You need people to grasp onto something. They have to know that we want to make Bangladesh into a new Medina. I'm just giving you, I don't know. There has to be something, a common person who is not sitting and reading a book, as you said, the intelligentsia, who is not part of the political circle, who is not part of grand, NGOs or something, who's just a common, ordinary person, who's just going about the business of his or her life. What are they? What can they see? What are you giving them? That is lacking. I don't see that vision. I don't see people saying, let's think of this as our guideline and let's work towards this. Without that, the common person cannot grapple what the change is. What will the change lead to? What is my destiny? And in this, religion is once again very helpful. Religion gives you wonderful stories, right? We came from somewhere. We were connected to this community and that community, like Islam really does this very beautifully, right? We were connected to the Jews, we are connected to the Christians, we were connected to other kind of groups of people. It tells a beautiful story of connections and relationships and where the relationships break down. And then it tells you, if you maintain these relationships, if you do your actions of piety and also do good deeds on this earth, help the destitute, help the widow, take care of the animals, take care of environment, be a good custodian, you will get to Jannah. It gives you a destination. If you replicate that idea into secular civic society terms, one can then understand that you need to tell a story with a conclusion. If there is no conclusion to a story, it'll be like the Arabian Nights, one story after another, after another. After a while, all you're waiting is to delay execution and not, a real reward, right? So I think Bangladesh needs that instead of just waiting for a failure, the execution, and so you keep just spinning out new story after another just to wait, postponing it. If you give a proper vision, people say, I know that my destination, I may not get there, but at least I'll try. I'll make an effort to see how far I can go.
And who will actually frame that vision? Is that politician, civil society, or who plays what role here?
This is what is surprising, is that you went through this uprising revolt without thinking why you were doing it and who will play what role. If it was not thought through, why did it happen? It's not an accident of history. It had happened because you had made some deep planning to do this, right? So who were the people who had planned? Who were the people who thought that a change is going to create this new transformation we're waiting for? They could be civil society actors, they can be intelligentsia, they can be politicians, they can be public intellectuals, they can be youth, women. If you take all of them into confidence and create consultative bodies, okay, if this is not done, this should be done now. That each little village should have consultative bodies. You bring these questions to them and ask them that we did this. What kind of country do you want to see? Give us your input. Collect these input from all your districts. How many districts do you have? 38 districts? 64 districts. From 64 districts, do a questionnaire, do a consultative shura, and get that. And see what is the pattern coming out of this. And that pattern may give you indication that this is what the populace wants. This is what the people want. And now who will deliver it is up to the people who did this uprising, did the revolt. They have to say, now we have to fulfill the task. And not just go and impose on people something and say, now you will behave like this. The feedback has to come from people. You led them into this. Now listen to what they're saying. Why did they join you? Why did they die?
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think only one person I heard saying it after July was Hardt-Nickachos Chair, was speaking along the same line what you just said,
Okay.
that we do really need an extensive, not a consultations, but what people genuinely want and what kind of Bangladesh they want to see and the changes they want to see.
Because without the people, who did you fight for? This is what was about this 2-day conference. When I first came, it's a lovely place, a very, very kind of Daira to put us up in this fancy hotel. I've never stayed here. I have come to Bangladesh many times. I could not afford to come and stay here. Daira has been incredibly generous. But my immediate reaction was, I asked some of them, I said, why did you hold the conference here? And they said, I can understand. They said, we have so many guests and we want, our universities don't have that infrastructure to host the guests. But I would have still liked to see the conference being actually held in a university. People like me don't need luxury. We live, mashallah, quite well. I don't need to be extractive and stay in a fancy hotel. I would be willingly staying in Bangladesh's Dhaka University. Give me just a clean bathroom. That is all I call for, and then and the conversation, let it be with the people. This is removed from the people. And when you remove something like this, you set the precedence of saying the ruler class is a different class and the people we rule over are some different people. And the gaps increase. And when the gap increases, all kinds of elements get into it, whether you call it political Islam, whether you call some kind of left radical secularism, whatever, that may not actually be good for this country. I don't know what is good for this country. People will tell you what is good for them.
Absolutely.
And you need to consult it. You need to get the input and you need to get it very quickly. You do not have time. This must be done in the next 2 months. If you're planning election, this has to come before you even start thinking of election. That this is what the people are telling us. And without people's participation in imagining a new Bangladesh, it's not going to be successful, in my opinion.
Okay, Professor Saikia, we know very well that one of your seminal work is about 1971, particularly on women. You the silenced voices you brought into limelight through your work, the silent voices of the women during our liberation war. How did you kind of approach writing these, and also what does it tell us about women's agency, especially during the time of conflict?
Thank you for asking me that question. Actually, as I told you, I was trained in Aligarh and I was trained to study medieval history. So I was very much a text-based person. And I did my first 2 books on actually text from Assam, which had connection to Thai. Okay. And in studying those texts, I realized that I was studying them as historical material, but for the people who actually had copies of those texts, the original manuscripts, I was studying with a priest to study those texts. I realized that for them, this is identity. The text they did not read. They had nothing to do with daily life or with the history. I, as a historian, was looking for material from these texts, for which I studied this language called Thai and Lao in order to read these texts. When I realized that text is actually has very different purposes for different people. For them, it is identity. It is their tool to say we had a different past and we have been now confined into this identity of Assam and India, and we are not these people. I realized, and they were doing, kind of identity movements, subnational movements were going on. I started asking the question, how do you write the history of the subcontinent without the barrier of flags? Flags are like text, flags. These are all tools of creating a sense of difference and division. So I said, I want to think of the subcontinent as one total space in which people have shared histories that can actually make them see one another as perhaps part of a similar landscape. But there is nothing like that one can investigate. Rather than seeing shared history, I saw violence in which people came together, but in this very perverse way of violating one another. That's where my 71 work began. In order to write a history of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, I had to enter into the field of violence because it is only in violence that they met one another. Otherwise, they seem to be completely separate. So when I started the work on 71, I thought again, I was going to understand how this war had transformed the subcontinent into nation states that are kind of inimical to one another, perhaps. This was just a hypothesis. But when I came to Bangladesh in 2001 to do the research, I actually found that there was very little archival material on the war itself and to understand the war. And what was really, really hidden under even the different kinds of silence in the archive was a silence of what people had experienced. This was also around the time when the Iraq war was breaking out, and I was in America 2003. And in India, there was this huge event of the Godra violence and post Babri Masjid 10 years after. So 2001, 2000, this period became very formative for me to think about who are the people who are forgotten in history, not who are the ones who are remembered, even in a history like the violence of a war. Because there were a lot of narratives about generals and armies and Mukti Juddhas and guerrillas and Mukti Bahini and this sector and that sector and the Pakistan army and the Indian army and all of that. What about the people? And the most hidden or unrecorded or forgotten story was what happened to ordinary people who were not part of the battlefield. And that's how I entered into the world of women. Women were not combatants. And yet it was the women who became the object of violation. And nobody was willing to talk about it. People were all claiming to be war heroes, but who was the victim was forgotten. And that's how I entered into this very murky and very disturbing, traumatic history of silences of women's voices. And I thought again, I was writing a book on women's war of 1971. And I was about to leave Bangladesh, having completed the research, I thought, till I met a young man, or older man at that time, who was a young man in 1971, who disclosed to me the story of his violent activities in 71 to the point of raping a neighbor who called him Bhai. And he said that I did this horrific act because I saw this person from the enemy group of Biharis. They were Pakistani collaborators. And so I, having joined the guerrilla, I thought I should punish them. And the person I punished was somebody who looked at me as a brother. And he was in deep remorse about this. So suddenly my world collapsed and shattered. I was writing about how history has forgotten a group of people, the women, right? And now this person who's telling me I have violated, I have been in a way part of this system that fought this war and has been glorified. But look at me as a human being. I was totally destroyed. So I didn't know what to do with it. And I went back to America. I thought about it. And I said, I'm going to also try to understand what happened to men who violated women, not just for the women who have been violated and continues to be forgotten, but what happens to men. So I went to Pakistan and spent a year in Pakistan and worked with the Pakistan army to understand what are the perpetrators' memories. And again, I found in a very marginal ways, right? It is not the obvious story. It was the most hidden story of men who told me what they had done here and the reflection and remorse of their loss of their humanity in the war. And they kept telling me, "Aap insaniyat ke bare likhiye, write about the human. Why are you writing about who did what? We lost ourselves, all of us. It doesn't matter who won the war. We lost our humanity." And that's how I then wrote the book based on what they told me, not what I was thinking, right? And so that, when you say I brought the silence into the realm of now hearing, or voice, I gave voice to something that was not voice. It is their voice. It is not mine. So it has been it's like a collaborative authorship. So the book is written in the way with full interviews, as it is. Section of the book is the interviews with the men, with the women, and a section is about the men. And then there's the whole history that I, as a historian, now trying to make sense of it. So what it taught me, this writing this book, is that history can be a site of violence and conflict and destruction, but history can also be a site of reflective rethinking of how to salvage and improve relationships. And that pushed me towards writing history more with the understanding that let's talk of history for making peace rather than history that creates further division.
Well, so on your rethinking, also kind of going back to earlier we were discussing about kind of reemerge in New Bangladesh. There are geopolitical rivalry in this region. Bangladesh happens to be at the crossroad, caught in between these rivalries. So moving forward as a kind of an historian, and also a historian of who tries to through history, tries to promote peace and humanity. So dignity, justice, and more the memory, and those kind of very dominant in your work. How that should be at the center in rethinking a new kind of reimagine Bangladesh book forward.
I think, or let me say, people don't like to be powerless. People love power, and a sense of power gives them a sense of strength. I, on the other hand, think vulnerability is strength.
I agree.
To be vulnerable is to open yourself up to the possibility of interactions, to developing relationships, to building futures. If I say, I'm so powerful, I don't need anything from anyone, I will tell, nobody is going to come to me. in a way, right? Whereas my vulnerability lets me see you as somebody like me, and you can then see me as I'm like you. Even states need to feel and be able to talk of vulnerability. States don't have to say, I can do everything on my own. I don't need you. And I will go my own direction, you go in your own direction, and we don't need to converge anywhere. When you look at nature, Bangladesh's nature, so many rivers have come together here. Brahmaputra, which starts in China, flows through Assam, where I'm from, then enters Bangladesh. You have the Padma, you have Meghna, and they all empty together into the Bay of Bengal. They come together, they don't override one another. In coming together, they have created a delta, which is a place to live, a place to flourish. Likewise, states need to come in certain things together. Yes, you flow alone. You be that individual state. You be a sovereign place. But you need to also find points of connection with one another. And through that shared vulnerability, that we are neighbors and we share common concerns and we have different strengths. You create a dialogue which is dialogical, constantly growing, and allows you to build something with trust. But Bangladesh, I think, has done quite well in this regard. Um, it seems to be not in a combative relationship with its neighbors. Um, it has, at least in this conference, also I saw that Bangladesh had brought a lot of different people: Nepal, Sri Lanka, India. Only, however, one person from Pakistan. I would have liked to see a little more of that. Um, we didn't bring anyone from Maldives or Bhutan, but still there was an attempt to bring 4 or 5 different people from different countries together to talk together. And Bangladesh, that ability to have conversations and create a common ground for people otherwise who would not be talking to one another, I think is its strength. And Bangladesh needs to build this more for the future. It can be the hub of creating peace and dialogue with neighbors. It can be in the forefront of this because none of the neighboring countries are doing that. They want to go their own direction. Each one saying, I will do good. I don't care about how you are doing. Right? And so if we live in a community like that, if you live in a neighborhood only in which your house is shining and bright and your neighbor does not have water or electricity, will that neighborhood be a safe neighborhood? No, somebody will come and steal from you because you have everything the other person doesn't. Likewise, in this region, South Asia, if each country just says, I will be prosperous, I don't care how you are doing, of course, there will be different, it's a differential kind of power. Bangladesh can play a very important role in saying, yes, we all develop, but we also must talk to one another and let's see how we share our strengths and how we work on our problems and can take a very neutral position on this and be that a leader in this relationship building.
And this is probably more so because of the geography as well as some of the common challenges and the climate crisis
Yes.
and that's impacts that's going to unfold.
In
So,
many of all the neighboring countries, right?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of common issues. Environment is a major, it's a very common issue. Look at the amount of stuff Nepal is now facing. Everest is overrun. They have to. There's a climate problem in Everest. In the Mount Elias, so they have a lot of problems of water sharing, all kinds of stuff. Bangladesh, India, also perhaps. Pakistan already has a lot of problems with water, and so there's some common issues that can be the secular common human issues.
Yeah.
They can be the point in which you can really actually build something that gives a vision for the future.
And this could be a center pillar for the collaborations
Yes,
around which
yeah.
can
Water is
build
a very important resource that will cause a lot of issues in the future. So Bangladesh, being a riverine, watery kind of country, it knows very well what the problems are and can be very significant player in this way.
Yeah. Professor, one more thing that I want to touch on is one of your current work has been focused on Muslim revolutionaries of the interwar and their kind of imagination of the freedom. So could you please shed a little bit of light on that, particularly in the sense of how their freedom of imaginations inspired kind of anti-colonial movement that's perhaps, if I understood it correctly, different from the nationalist aspiration of freedom.
Right. No, that's a very good question. I'm still researching. It's like becoming like a detective's plot. It takes me to multiple different kind of archives and all over the world. But I'm trying to understand this question of what was azadi. They use the word azadi. Um, um, from their perspective of the late 19th, early 20th century by following the biographies and it's an intellectual history, history of idea, what is freedom, what is Azadi, based on 4 of these revolutionary actors. 3 of them are from what today we call Pakistan or became part of the Pakistan world, and one of them is from India. okay, or they were all from British India, but
Mhm.
then with geography, they got divided
Yeah.
into these different nation states. So one is Maulana Barkatullah Bhopali.
Mhm.
Maulana Barkatullah Bhopali was the first Indian Muslim to
Mhm.
go to England, and he worked in a Liverpool mosque. Basically, he was picked up by Quillian, which was
Mhm.
a who was a English Muslim convert, the Quilliam Mosque, which still exists.
Mhm.
And Maulana Bhopali basically started by his career by teaching Arabic and Persian, but he was a political activist from the beginning, and that's the reason he went to England. From there, he went to America, being
Mhm.
invited by Alexander Webb, who was a Muslim convert,
Mhm.
American Muslim convert. And in America, he worked with people like Marcus Garvey from the Black Panther movement,
Mhm.
with the Ghadar Party,
Mhm.
who was the Sikh group who were
Mhm.
anti-colonial, and then in Germany with the communists and the
Mhm.
socialists, with Lenin, with
Mhm.
the revolution of that period. So this Maulana Barkatullah Bhopali
Mhm.
is a very interesting character who is an internationalist,
Mhm.
right, and building networks
Mhm.
across the continent of Europe, America, and Asia. He also went to Japan. He taught there, means a lot,
Mhm.
Afghanistan, all of that place, building networks with anti-imperial forces,
Mhm.
particularly British imperialism, working against British imperialism, but through the method of intellectual discourse,
Mhm.
creating knowledge, right, and talking about what does it mean to be a free person.
Mhm.
And he's also very critical about the Islamic Caliphate
Mhm.
that had become the Turkish Caliphate, which had become kind of very westernized and was not really doing the work of the Khalifa, and rather was just pandering to. So he
Mhm.
wanted Islam to be the guidance, but in this kind of consultative, um, intellectual way that provides new direction. His Azadi, he did not write a great deal about Azadi itself, but he talked about himself as a Muslim. Not people used to think he's a communist. He is far from that. He was
Mhm.
a Muslim radical thinker, one
Mhm.
can say, right?
Mhm.
The second person is a very dubious character. He is known as Fazal Ilahi.
Mhm.
Fazal Ilahi Wazirabadi. He
Mhm.
was from Wazirabad,
Mhm.
and he was inspired by Syed Ahmed, not Syed Ahmed Khan, Syed Ahmed, the first Mujahideen
Mhm.
of India, in British India
Mhm.
from the 1830s.
Mhm.
And he's joined that Mujahideen group that
Mhm.
was working anti British in the area of what today we know as the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa area,
Mhm.
in Balakot and
Mhm.
beyond. And his idea was that by helping the Germans and
Mhm.
Russians, he would bring down
Mhm.
the British thing through. He was more like an arms trader kind of person.
Mhm.
He wrote extensively.
Mhm.
He believed strongly that jihad is the way to do free yourself. And his jihad was a violent jihad. It was not a reflective jihad. It was
Mhm.
not a struggle of the self. But he became more and more embroiled in this kind of a subterranean world of revolutionaries that he used to help
Mhm.
by sitting in that border of Afghanistan and British India and smuggling people, arms, and all kinds of
Mhm.
information
Just
back and forth. He's a very interesting, as I said, a very dubious character, but very interesting man to read, and how he
uh,
sort of has these
mm,
dreams that sort of tells him that he must continue on his mission. And he finally died in 1960s. The government of Pakistan, after Pakistan came into being, had a warrant against him,
mm,
as a not as a revolutionary, but the
mm,
warrant was to arrest him as a criminal.
mm,
And then they made some deal. He was actually, you know, part of the, kind of underground army, and he died in the 60s. And so he has left us a lot of material of how he got into this. And I'm just reading and trying to write about what does a person sitting on a border area think of freedom, in which the center is to be dismantled. There's no
mm,
center to be. There cannot be a center.
mm,
It's a fragmentation that
mm,
this kind of people wanted. For them, freedom is a complete rupture from any central authority.
mm,
The third person, that again a very interesting character and has a very checkered political history, is a person known as Iqbal Shadhai. And Iqbal Shadhai was from Sialkot.
mm,
He was an Urdu kind of professor. Later on, he ended his life as an Urdu professor. He went to Europe,
mm,
and he was a young person who joined the Hijrat movement
mm,
and the Khilafat movement,
mm,
and then he was the Khudam Kaaba and all of that. He ended up in Europe, in Italy. He worked with the permission of Mussolini
mm,
to run a radio station, underground radio station, where they did propaganda work
mm,
to
mm,
tell Indian people to rise up against the British. And the British, for the longest time, could not figure out where this transmission was taking from. They
mm.
thought it was from Afghanistan or something. It was from Italy. Okay,
Interesting.
this guy, and this was known as Radio Himal.
Mm,
And
mm,
Radio Himal created propaganda work to really galvanize Muslims to join the Indian Congress Party at that time and join in this non-violent but um, chaotic kind of create chaos so that the British cannot have the rule of law and order, right? So galvanize a local person to join this kind of political activism, and he was very popular. And he was underground for a very long time. Then when independence took place and Pakistan was founded, he ended up in Pakistan. But once he arrived in Pakistan, soon after he found that the country had become very corrupt and that it had already lost its vision and its direction. So he again escaped back to Italy and taught there as a professor of Urdu in the University of Turin. And then finally he came back to Pakistan and died in 1974 and is buried in Lahore. Um, so his idea was really to galvanize local people so that they would join larger political activism to undermine the British. So he also helped Nehru at some point. He helped Jinnah in their trip to Europe. So he was like more like an intermediary person doing the work of making Indian politicians, Congress and Muslim League, become more known to the European politicians and help the Indian Muslims, Hindus, whoever listening to his radio station to join the freedom movement. And the final person is a Sikh convert to Islam, Ubaidullah Sindhi, who was Deobandi, who went to Deoband and was part of the Reshmi Rumal. I don't know if you know the Tehreek Reshmi Rumal, where people had hoped the Hijrat movement, the Khilafat movement, where they had used this ideas to transmit revolutionary ideas, the Reshmi Rumal, which was intercepted by the British. And then he ended up in Turkey and lived in exile in Mecca for 14 years. He has left us a lot of material of his concept of Swarvarajya, an autonomous subcontinent in which all the units are like a federation of the subcontinent in which they do all their business of running the states, the federation on their own, only in matters of defense and monetary principles, they have a common system. It's like the European Union of today, if you can think of it. Each one of them is autonomous. They have their own thing, but they consult like NATO, and then they have a common euro currency. So currency, one currency and defense. So he has left us a lot of material of how he conceived what the free country would be. And a free country will be a unit of multiple provinces with their autonomy. No, so they all bring a very Islamic concept of horizontal relationship, not vertical, not a single ruler, horizontally equal, and in certain matters they will work together so that they can have a common platform in order to deal with other neighboring countries, which may be unitary countries, but this was a federated thing. So this azadi is a very different concept from what it turned out to be, what India and Pakistan became, with very central governments and then singular language, singular everything, compared to what the Muslim revolutionaries were thinking in the late 19th and early 20th century. These are completely forgotten figures. I have a tendency of finding things that nobody else seems to be interested about. They seem to almost allure me, you know. So nobody has written anything about several of these people. Ubaidullah Sindhi has been recently rediscovered in Pakistan as a person who has given a different font, a different imagination of what India, Pakistan, Bangladesh in his idea could be. So there are some study circles who read Ubaidullah Sindhi's stuff a little. And again, they asked me because I'm the one who is doing all this reading. Barkatullah Bhopali has been completely written out, although he was absolutely instrumental in creating this European alliance for India. Today, when revolutionaries, they have exhibits on revolutionaries, Barkatullah Bhopali is not at all included. But there is, incidentally, in Madhya Pradesh, few years ago, they created a university and named it after him, Maulana Barkatullah Bhopali University, and it has not yet been removed. The name continues. Iqbal Shadhai, as I said, is an unknown, dubious character who sat, not Iqbal Shadhai, but Wazir Abadi, Fazalillahi Wazir Abadi. This just, in that. But today that continues to be a very tense area, the Fatah area, the federally administered tribal area of India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan area, right? That's where Wazirabadi was. So it's very interesting, but people don't know much. So they come to me again and I'm writing. There's few MATCs here and there in Pakistan that people are now writing about them. And Iqbal Shadhai is not at all. And so there may be many more characters like this, but because they were so underground and they were so forgotten, that we have not been able to unearth many of these stories. There may be more Muslims who have contributed to a freedom thinking that was different from the Congress and the Muslim League way of thinking, and was giving a more people-centered way of thinking of freedom, and the outcome of freedom as more people-centered. But I have focused on these 4 people, and I'm writing the book on these 4 people.
Well, the kind of character that you explained, to be very honest, I read very few history books. Now I'm convinced to read it when it comes out. No, I'm really looking forward to reading
It's a very painstaking work, because these are only archives where you find it espionage, because the British were looking at them from the point of view of spies. There was surveillance. Today we talk of surveillance. You should have looked at surveillance of the British people. And I only find them in those little notes of police records, intelligence records. They're not in the normal archive. And so it's taking a long time to piece together this material.
Quite interesting and fascinating work. Professor, just to end the conversation on a positive note, what are kind of hopeful about the future of this region, or in particular, since you are here in Dhaka, about Bangladesh, 1 or 2 things that you see in a good positive way that might come out moving forward?
I keep coming back to Bangladesh because I'm so fond of it, right? So there must be a lot of positive things about this place, without a doubt. It's Bangladesh has, as I said, this incredible history of confluence and convergence, and has been a very peaceful place for a very long time, until 71 actually had happened, right? It had exploitation of the peasants versus the landlords, the zamindars, and all of that. It's a historical known truth, right? But despite those kind of inequalities that have been in Bangladesh, there was also a very strong resilient spirit here, which I find that to be its strength. Its resilience doesn't come from feeling powerful, it's from the vulnerability. I find that extremely, for me as a historian, as I said, a humanist, as a person who takes religion very seriously, I find that combination of resilience with vulnerability a very, very very important characteristics of actually coming to terms with your humanity, right? And saying, I depend on others, but I also make my own effort. Or I interact with others, but I also make my own effort. And I think Bangladesh, as I said today, like with this conference, was able to bring so many people together, because I work with others, but at the same time, I also want to be more than this. I want to have my own individual characteristics, or character, or identity, whatever you might call it. That I think is Bangladesh's strength. Its resilience makes it capable of interacting with a lot of people. Its vulnerability allows it to keep thinking about what it can be, rather than say, I am here and I don't need to do anything more. Right? So it's constantly trying to investigate how it can be better and better. And that journey of exploring its potential will only strengthen it as it remains vulnerable.
Yeah, Professor, I personally can absolutely relate to my areas of focus or interest, or the area domain that I explore. Often Bangladesh is projected internationally, the most vulnerable, and so on and on. There were reasons for so, but a few years back, one of my mentors and advisors kind of shifted that notion, saying that no, Bangladesh is perhaps one of the countries most resilient on the planet Earth. And there was an example I remember he gave. If there is a flood of similar scale, and not a factor is not the same, but just for understanding, happens in somewhere in the UK, US,
they will collapse.
Many more people, and
the whole system will collapse.
System collapses and so on. But people here managed to kind of
get by and get on, and just move on, right? And start again tomorrow. Yeah, it is. That's it. Means, but if you only think I'm resilient, it makes you think I'm so powerful, I'll always overcome everything. But when you also realize that, no, I'm very vulnerable too, then you respect nature, you respect others, and I see that in Bangladesh. People are very aware of that. And I think it's one of its strengths.
What a fascinating discussion it has been, Professor. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed the conversation. It was very helpful. Yeah. Thank you very much.